My name is Lisa, and on Christmas Eve, my mother looked my children in the eye and told them they didn't deserve gifts. She humiliated them, and I said nothing. But I've been planning my revenge ever since, and trust me, she never saw it coming. Where are you watching from? Type your city in the comments, because by the end of this story, you're going to want to tell me exactly what you would have done. Cedar Falls was glowing in the way small towns do on Christmas Eve, icicle lights blinking along roof lines, a dusting of snow softening the edges of worn sidewalks, and fireplaces flickering behind drawn curtains. But inside my mother's house, the warmth was as fake as the tinsel garland wrapped around her stair rail. The living room looked like a department store had exploded in it. Towering piles of presents, hand-tied bows, glimmering ribbons, scented candles, a roaring fire. My sister Emily was already seated on the couch, her 2 kids buzzing with excitement as they circled the tree. My own children, Zoe, 7, and Caleb, 5, sat politely beside me, clutching mugs of cocoa like they were holding their breath. And maybe I was too. Margaret, our mother, stood in front of the tree like a grand MC, clapping her hands. "All right, let's begin. Emily, help me pass these out, will you?" It started innocently. A dollhouse for Lily, Emily's youngest. An expensive Lego set for Max. One after another, gifts with glittery tags marked to Lily, love Grandma. To Max, from Nana. My children's names weren't called. Not once. At first, I thought maybe she'd hidden theirs in the back, saving them for last. Or maybe they were grouped somewhere else. But with every rip of paper and squeal of delight from Emily's kids, I felt my stomach tighten. I could feel Zoe watching me from the corner of her eye, her smile wobbling. When the last gift was handed out and nothing was left under the tree, my voice found its way past the lump in my throat. "Mom, what about Zoe and Caleb's presents?" Margaret didn't look at me. She bent to adjust the fire. "I didn't get them anything." The room fell into a hush. Even Max paused mid-tear. I blinked. "You, what?" Now she turned. And the look on her face, like she was daring me to question her, still makes my hands shake when I think about it. "Bad children don't deserve gifts," she said coolly. "And they're not guests here, they're your responsibility." I didn't answer. Couldn't. My face flushed hot, then cold, and I felt the weight of 100 invisible knives digging into my back. Emily pretended to sip her wine, eyes darting anywhere but toward me. Not even a whisper of protest. My kids didn't cry. They just got quiet. Zoe folded her hands in her lap. Caleb curled against my side. And that broke me more than any scream could have. Their silence. Their small, brave attempts at dignity. I managed to whisper, "Come on, let's get some air," and led them upstairs, pretending I needed help with something in the guest room. Once the door closed behind us, I knelt down, my voice thick. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." Zoe looked up. "Did we do something wrong?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Never. You are the best gift I've ever had." Later that night, after they'd fallen asleep under the string lights we'd taped along the ceiling, I sat cross-legged on the floor with my laptop and a maxed-out credit card, searching clearance sections, sorting filters by fastest shipping. It didn't matter if I had to eat canned soup for a month. My kids would never feel forgotten again. It was then, while my children dreamed beside me, their cheeks flushed with the kind of disappointment they didn't know how to name, that I decided something. This house may have broken me tonight, but it would never define me again. And when the time came, my mother would remember this Christmas, but not for the reasons she thought. The house was quiet, too quiet for Christmas night. Downstairs, the fireplace crackled and glasses clinked as my mother and Emily carried on like nothing had happened. As if 2 children hadn't been emotionally gutted upstairs, as if silence erased cruelty. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, watching Caleb sleep with his arm flopped across Zoe's side. They'd curled together instinctively, like they knew they had to hold each other up because no one else would. It should have been a night of magic. Instead, it felt like exile. I opened my laptop and whispered my own kind of prayer, not the kind you speak out loud, but the kind you bargain with. Please let the sizes still be in stock. Please let the shipping come in time. Please let my card not decline. I clicked through clearance tabs like I was defusing a bomb. Thermal coats with built-in mittens. Snow boots with thick soles. One plush hoodie in Zoe's favorite lavender shade, half off. For Caleb, a NASA-themed jacket he'd once pointed at in a catalog and whispered, "That's astronaut cool." Toys next. Not the cheap kind that breaks after a week, but the good stuff. The things other kids would brag about after break. A STEM robotics set for Caleb. A doll that could speak multiple languages for Zoe. If their schoolmates were going to talk, so would my kids. The total made my stomach tighten. My savings, what little was left after gas, groceries, overdue car insurance, was down to a number so low I could barely look at it. I hovered over the place order button, my hand shaking. Then I clicked it. If I had to eat dollar store ramen for a month, so be it. If I had to walk to work in the snow with holes in my boots, fine. My kids would not be forgotten again. Not by me. Not by anyone. I closed the laptop and let out a slow breath. The soft glow of the string lights blinked over their sleeping faces, and for a moment the guest room, the one they'd been shoved into like afterthoughts, felt like hours. Hours alone. Zoe stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Mom!" I crawled in beside her and kissed her hair. "Did Santa forget us?" she asked quietly. "No," I whispered. "He was just running a little behind, but he knows you've been brave, and he's on his way." Her breath slowed again, and her hand found mine beneath the covers. That night I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply made a vow. Whatever scraps of dignity I had left, I'd use them to build something better. A real home, a safe space. A future where Zoe and Caleb never again had to wonder if they were unwanted. And maybe one day, when my mother had nowhere left to turn, she'd knock on my door. And I'd make sure she remembered this night. Every word. Every omission. Every gift withheld. Because revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in silence and costs exactly the amount of your last paycheck. By Monday morning, the sparkle of Christmas had long faded. At least, for most people. For me, it had turned to ash the moment my mother looked at my children and declared them unworthy. But there was no time for wounds. Bills didn't care about bruised feelings. And the holiday break was over, which meant I was back in the small beige office where I filed numbers and balanced spreadsheets, accounting work for a modest property firm just outside Cedar Falls. I hung my coat on the same hook as always, then paused, my hand still on the fabric. My fingers trembled slightly. I'd done the math a dozen times in my head, but it didn't change reality. Between rent I hadn't paid in 2 months, new boots for the kids, and the Christmas splurge, I was tapped out. That's when I made the decision I'd been trying to avoid. I walked down the hall toward Mr. Daniels' office, my heels clicking on the linoleum like tiny betrayals. Daniel Daniels, yes, that's his real name, wasn't the type to smile much. Not cold, just private. Maybe 50, salt and pepper beard, always in a pressed shirt and tie even when no one was looking. He ran his business with a quiet kind of integrity, the kind you notice more by absence than declaration. I knocked lightly. "Mr. Daniels, do you have a minute?" He looked up from his monitor, gave a quick nod, and motioned me in. The door clicked shut behind me. I sat across from him, smoothing my skirt out of habit. "What's on your mind?" he asked, folding his hands. I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent," I began. My voice was steady, but only because I'd practiced this speech in the mirror all weekend. "I'm in a bit of a bind. With the holidays and some family things, I'm short this month. Would it be possible to get an advance, just enough to cover?" I stopped myself. I didn't need to say everything. Humiliation wasn't required for honesty. He didn't respond right away, just leaned back slightly, watching me. The pause was unbearable. "I know it's not policy," I added quickly, "and I understand if it's not feasible. Lisa." His voice was low, firm. "You've worked here almost 4 years, right?" 3.5, he nodded. "In all that time, have you ever asked for anything?" "No, sir." "Have you ever been late, missed a deadline, brought anything less than your best?" "No." He tapped his pen against his desk once, then again. "I'll approve the advance," he said finally. "It won't solve everything, but I can have accounting process it by end of day." I felt my breath hitch. Relief hit me so fast I almost looked away. "Thank you," I managed. "Really, thank you." Mr. Daniels nodded once more, then leaned forward. "I don't need to know what's going on. But I do know this. When someone like you finally asks for help, it means they've been holding everything up far too long." That hit harder than I expected. I stood, trying to keep my face composed. As I reached the door, he added, "And Lisa, don't be a stranger around here. You've earned more than just a paycheck." Outside, in the fluorescent hum of the hallway, I stopped and rested my hand against the wall. Not to cry, just to breathe. For the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, and that was the beginning. The smallest flicker of power, buried under bills and years of swallowed pride, had finally sparked back to life. I didn't realize how much I'd changed until my coworkers started looking at me differently. Not because I suddenly wore new clothes or smiled more. No, it was subtler than that. Like my spine had straightened. Like I was finally standing in my own name again instead of flinching every time life tapped me on the shoulder. I'd picked up every shift I could, volunteering for weekend reconciliations and month-end audits without being asked. My desk light was always the last one off in the evenings, and more than once I caught Mr. Daniels watching from his office doorway, just watching. Not with suspicion, with something closer to curiosity, or maybe recognition. The truth was, I still had almost nothing. No savings, no space of my own. But after that advance, I'd been able to buy some time. And with time came a strange kind of clarity. I'd spent years trying to keep everyone comfortable. My ex-husband, my mother, Emily, while slowly disappearing myself. Not anymore. One Thursday, the office emptied out early. Most people were off to some networking event or their kids' school play. I stayed behind to wrap up a tax compliance file. By the time I shut down my computer, the sky outside had turned navy and the parking lot was dusted with snow. As I bundled into my coat, I heard a voice behind me. "You walking home?" I turned to find Mr. Daniels adjusting his scarf by the front door. "Oh no, just to the bus stop," I replied. "It's not too far." He raised a brow. "It's 12 degrees and you've been here since 7 a.m. Come on, I'll drop you." I hesitated just for a second, but then I nodded. "Thank you." His car was neat and quiet like him. Jazz hummed softly from the speakers, the kind with no lyrics, just a low saxophone keeping tempo with the wipers. Halfway through the drive, he glanced over. "Your kids," he said. "They doing okay?" The question caught me off guard. "They're adjusting. It's not ideal staying with my parents, but I'm trying to make it feel normal for them." He nodded, tapping the steering wheel with his thumb. "You work like someone who has no backup plan." I gave a small laugh. "That's accurate." We pulled up outside the house. The porch light was off, and the window in the guest room flickered faintly. Zoe and Caleb must have left their nightlight on. Before I reached for the door handle, Mr. Daniels turned toward me. "You know, Lisa, I've been around a lot of people who buckle when life leans on them, but not you. You carry things most people don't even see." I blinked. The compliment landed deeper than he probably meant it to. "You're the strongest woman I know," he added. Quiet. No agenda. Just truth. I didn't know what to say. I opened the door, the cold air rushing in like a reminder of where I was headed. "Thank you," I said softly. "Good night, Mr. Daniels." "Dan," he replied, his eyes holding mine for just a beat longer than expected. "When it's just us, you can call me Dan." I closed the door behind me and stood on the porch for a moment, heart thudding like it had heard something I hadn't quite processed yet. No one had called me strong in a long time. Not without expecting something in return. And no one had seen me as anything more than a mother clinging to her kids for survival. But tonight, in the way he said my name, I felt like a woman again. Like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken. Just rebuilding. I didn't know I was allowed to feel this way again. That was the thought that came to me on a quiet Saturday morning, watching Dan crouch on the living room floor, trying to assemble a second-hand foosball table while Caleb offered helpful instructions and Zoe critiqued the color. Our little apartment had become loud, and not from shouting or slammed doors, but from laughter. Laughter that still caught me off guard, like a language I hadn't spoken in years. Dan had started coming by more often, but never with pressure. He knocked. He brought groceries I couldn't afford but never called it charity. He remembered Zoe's favorite soup and Caleb's weird obsession with astronaut documentaries. He asked if I needed anything, but more importantly, he noticed even when I didn't ask. At first, the kids were wary, Zoe especially. She was 7 but carried herself like someone who'd learned not to trust too fast. She watched him like a hawk at first, measured, quiet. Caleb was quicker to warm, but even he looked to her before fully opening up. And Dan never forced it. Instead, he showed up. He'd show up to soccer games in the rain, bringing folding chairs and dry socks. He helped Caleb practice in the parking lot, cheering like it was the World Cup. Zoe, who never liked group attention, once drew a picture of him teaching Caleb how to kick. She left it on the kitchen table. Dan didn't say a word, just tucked it into his wallet like it was gold. One evening, after a school open house, the four of us grabbed burgers from a drive-thru and ate in the parking lot because we couldn't afford the fancy diner down the street. Zoe asked Dan if Pluto counted as a planet or not, and they spent 10 minutes debating it. When she laughed, really laughed at one of his jokes, something shifted. Her shoulders dropped. The guarded look in her eyes softened. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "I don't think he's going anywhere." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled the blanket up under her chin. "Let's see what happens when people don't have to be asked to stay," I finally said. We began inviting him over for simple things. Board game nights, movie marathons, spaghetti dinners with too much garlic bread. He never made it feel like a favor. He always brought something: cookies, paper towels, once even a box of crayons, just because the reds were running out. One night, he asked if I wanted to get dinner, just the two of us. I hesitated. It felt selfish. What if the kids needed me? What if they thought I was choosing someone else again? When I asked Zoe, she just rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, go, you wear makeup when you smile at him, that's new." We went to a local Italian place with flickering candles and quiet corners. It wasn't fancy, but it felt special. Halfway through dinner, Dan reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not just a mother, you know." I swallowed. Hard. He wasn't trying to minimize that part of me. He respected it. But in that moment, I realized how deeply I'd buried the rest of me. The woman who once had dreams. The woman who liked jazz and warm socks and kissing just because. He brought her back to life without even trying. Some nights, after the kids were asleep, we'd sit on the fire escape with mugs of tea, watching the traffic hum below. I'd tell him about things I never talked about, how my ex used to roll his eyes when I spoke too long, how my mother made me feel like an inconvenience even as a child. Dan didn't flinch, he just listened. "This place isn't much," I once said, looking around our tiny apartment. "But at least the walls aren't lined with judgment." "They're lined with love," he said simply. I looked over at him then, really looked, and I knew I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving someone else's choices. I was living mine. There's a strange kind of silence that follows when the people who once looked down on you start falling apart. Not a satisfying silence, more like the quiet after a distant crash. You don't cheer, you just listen. And wait. It started with whispers. Aunt Nancy, who never missed a chance to praise Margaret's antique shop, suddenly stopped name-dropping it in conversation. A friend of Emily's posted on social media about unpaid favors and bad debts. Vague, but loud enough to draw side eyes. I didn't say anything, just watched the slow unravel from a safe distance. Then one afternoon while picking up groceries, I bumped into Mrs. Carr, our old neighbor. She leaned in close like she was sharing something scandalous. "Did you hear about your mother's store?" she asked, voice dripping with a mix of pity and curiosity. "No foot traffic for weeks. People say she's behind on rent." I pretended to be surprised. "That's terrible." Inside, I felt nothing, no rush of vengeance, no thrill, just nothing. Margaret's antique store used to be her pride. Gleaming glass cabinets, pristine doilies, overpriced vintage that mostly came from estate sales. She'd brag about how it was the kind of place real collectors go. But foot traffic had slowed since COVID, and her refusal to modernize. No website, no delivery options, not even a digital payment method, was catching up with her. Emily, on the other hand, was unraveling in a much louder way. Her husband, Darren, had always been the slippery kind. Too many business cards, not enough consistent employment. Gambling had been a hobby until it wasn't. And when he finally emptied their savings into a crypto scheme that bottomed out, he packed a bag and left. Just like that. Emily tried to keep up appearances at first, still posted filtered pictures of brunches and her kids in matching outfits. But people noticed. The clothes weren't new anymore. The smiles didn't reach her eyes. And then came the foreclosure notice taped to her front door. Word traveled fast in Cedar Falls. I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't feel vindicated. These were the same people who sneered when I moved into my parents' guest room. The same voices that called me unstable behind my back, who praised Emily for being put together and such a great mom. Now, their perfect house had plumbing issues, unpaid bills, and a growing stack of final notices on the kitchen table. I never gloated. I just paid attention. One night after the kids went to bed, I stood at the window with Dan beside me. We were folding laundry, mundane, comforting, and I told him what I'd heard. "They're spiraling," I said quietly. "Mom's shop is failing, Emily's broke, and Darren's gone." Dan didn't look surprised. "Things catch up. Do you think that makes me cruel for not reaching out?" He paused. "No, I think it makes you human, and I think it's okay to let people face their own consequences." I looked down at the socks I was pairing. One pink, one blue, one tiny with holes in the heel. "They never checked on me," I said, not bitter, just remembering. "Not once when I was crashing." Dan leaned over and kissed the top of my head. "You're allowed to protect the peace you built." That night, I lay awake longer than usual, not because I was worried, but because I knew what was coming. People like my mother and sister didn't reach out when things were fine. They only came calling when they needed to be rescued. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one falling on my sword to save them. Peace, I learned, isn't a loud thing. It doesn't arrive like a parade or announce itself with balloons. It just settles, like soft light at the end of a storm. Our new apartment wasn't much by anyone's standards. 2 bedrooms, thrifted furniture, mismatched dishes, but it was ours. No locked doors, no icy silence, no whispered accusations in the hallway. The kind of quiet that didn't feel dangerous. The kind of quiet you could fall asleep in. Dan had officially moved in a few weeks earlier, and though the transition was small in logistics, it was monumental in presence. His toothbrush beside mine, his mug in our kitchen cabinet, his voice reading bedtime stories that turned Zoe's nerves into giggles and Caleb's questions into dreams. And just like that, I had a home. Not long after we moved in, I was flipping pancakes on a lazy Sunday morning, Zoe dancing to a playlist, Caleb building a spaceship out of Legos, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut said pick up. "Hello." A long pause, then, "Lisa." My mother's voice, small, raw, almost unrecognizable. "It's me," she said again, as if I didn't know. I stepped onto the balcony, closing the door behind me. The cool air bit at my arms. "What do you want?" I didn't know who else to call. That was rich. "You've got Emily," I said evenly. Another pause. "She and the kids are struggling. The house is in foreclosure. The electric's about to be shut off. We just need a little help just to get through the month." It was like listening to a ghost plead for shelter in the home it once haunted. I let the silence stretch, the way she used to when she wanted me to beg for forgiveness I didn't owe. "I'm not in a position to rescue anyone," I said, my tone sharp but not cruel. "I've done that too many times before, and we both know how that ended." Her breath caught. "Lisa, please, they're just kids." "So were mine. So were mine when you turned your back on them without a flicker of regret." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it only halfway. "I hope you figure it out, but I've got my own family to take care of now." Click. I walked back inside and leaned against the wall, heart pounding, not from guilt, but from the unfamiliar throb of finally setting a boundary and meaning it. Dan looked up from where he was helping Caleb with a puzzle. "You okay?" I nodded. "That was my mother." His brow lifted slightly. "Everything all right?" "She wanted help with their electric bill." He didn't say anything, just waited. "I told her no." Dan gave a single nod, then smiled, not out of satisfaction, but pride. Like he knew how hard that call was for someone who'd been raised to bleed on command. That night, as I folded laundry and tucked the kids into bed, I felt it, that shift. The power wasn't in revenge. It wasn't in screaming or slamming doors. It was in the quiet refusal, the steady voice, the simple word, no. And this time it echoed through every room I called mine. Some truths find you when you least want them. Not with drama or shouting, but quietly, casually, like a whisper dropped at the wrong moment that echoes anyway. It started as I was juggling 2 bags of groceries, a soccer ball under one arm, and Caleb's forgotten backpack slung over my shoulder. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard someone call my name. "Lisa." I turned and nearly dropped the milk. It was Mrs. Dillard, our former neighbor, still wearing that oversized floral scarf, still clutching her handbag like someone might snatch it. She hadn't changed a bit, except maybe her voice had dropped into something softer, like what she was about to say might matter more than she wanted it to. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said, blinking. "You look good, healthy, happier." I gave a polite smile. "Thanks, it's been a long road." Her eyes flitted behind me toward the kids' bikes leaned against our stoop. "Is that your little boy's?" I nodded. "Caleb's, he's learning to ride without training wheels." She smiled, but then it faded. "I didn't want to bring this up, really, but I thought maybe you should know about your mama and Emily." I froze. "They're over at the temporary shelter off Highway 22, moved in last week. Word is Emily's husband cleaned out what little savings they had and took off. Your mama's shop's closed now, paper in the windows. Someone said they're both applying for state housing. And the kids, they've been missing school, no warm coats, that kind of thing." She looked like she wanted me to say something comforting. I didn't. "Anyway," she mumbled, adjusting her scarf, "figured you'd want to know." I thanked her and climbed the rest of the stairs in a daze. My hands were numb, though not from the cold. Inside, Dan was setting the table. Zoe was humming in the hallway, carefully wrapping a present for her best friend's birthday party. Caleb was on the floor, narrating a space battle between a toothbrush and a dinosaur. Our little world buzzed with normal, but something had tilted in mine. Later that night, I stood by the window, arms folded, watching snow collect like powdered sugar along the curb. Dan came up behind me, silent as always when he knew my mind was somewhere heavy. "That was Mrs. Dillard today," I said without turning. "She told me about my mom and Emily. They're in a shelter." His hand brushed my shoulder. "She asked for help again," he asked. "No, not this time, but I think she will." We stood in silence for a while. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Like it should feel like justice, but all I feel is exhaustion and guilt and anger." "Those can all live in the same place," he said, and they did. I remembered every Christmas where Emily's kids got first pick while mine got picked apart. Every time Margaret told me I was selfish for needing help, lazy for leaving a bad marriage, dramatic for crying in her guest room. And now she needed me, not for comfort, for survival. The next morning I moved like a ghost, got the kids off to school, made coffee I barely touched. And then I opened the hall closet and began pulling things out. New coats, gently used snow boots, notebooks Zoe had never opened, extra gloves, school supplies, toothbrushes. I added 2 new toys I'd planned to save for birthdays. I packed it all into a plain box. No note, no name. Dan appeared in the doorway, watching me tape it shut. "Want company?" "No," I said softly. "Not for this." The shelter sat on the edge of town, down a road lined with warehouses and forgotten gas stations. I parked across the street, box beside me, engine running, watching. And then I saw them. Margaret stepped outside first. Thinner, shoulders hunched in a coat 2 sizes too big. Emily followed, face pale, hair unwashed. Her 2 kids trailed behind, holding each other's hands like they were anchoring themselves. I hadn't seen them look this human in years. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just felt done. When the van pulled up to take them to the city center, I crossed the street, left the box on the concrete step, and walked away before they ever turned around. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. I used to imagine this moment. Late at night, lying awake while Zoe softly snored and Caleb kicked in his sleep, I would picture my mother showing up on my doorstep, shrunken, humbled, desperate. I never pictured what I'd say. I only pictured the look in her eyes, and now here she was. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way. I'd just come back from the pharmacy, groceries still on the counter. Zoe's school project sat half-painted on the kitchen table, and Dan had taken Caleb to soccer. I was humming to myself, folding towels, when I heard it. 3 short knocks. Not frantic, not angry, just hollow. I opened the door and time buckled. My mother, Margaret, stood on the other side like a ghost who'd wandered too far from home. She looked smaller than I remembered, not just older, but dimmed. Her once perfectly pressed coat hung off her shoulders, fraying at the cuffs. Her eyes were red, face blotched. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Lisa," she began, and my name crumbled in her throat. Please, we have nowhere else to go." I didn't move, not even a breath. Behind her, the hallway felt colder, like the air had followed her, stripped of warmth. "We," I asked. "Me, Emily, the kids." Her voice cracked. "They're sick, tired. We've been in the shelter over 2 weeks. It's not safe, not clean." I didn't know where else to turn. The woman who once sneered at single mothers, who called social workers lazy leeches, who told me that needing help was a weakness, was now shaking on my doorstep asking for mercy. For a second, the old reflex bubbled up, let her in, offer tea, pretend everything could be nice again. But that Lisa was gone. I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me, her brows lifted. "Can I come in, please? I just want to sit." I shook my head. "Not yet." Her mouth parted slightly in disbelief. She wasn't used to no, she wasn't used to me saying it. "I need to say something," I said slowly, firmly. "And you need to listen, that's the price." She nodded too quickly, already trying to collapse into forgiveness, but I wasn't handing it out like coupons this time. "I remember that Christmas Eve," I said. "Zoe didn't understand why you called her a guest. Caleb asked me if Santa forgot them. You gave Emily's kids bikes and coats. Mine got shame. And you told them they didn't deserve gifts." "I was upset," she started. "No," I cut in. "You were cruel, and it wasn't just that night. It was every time you praised Emily while ignoring me. Every time you said I should have tried harder to keep my husband. Every time you made my children feel like burdens, like shadows." Her eyes filled with tears. I kept going. "I built this home without you. I rebuilt my kids' sense of worth without you. We healed without you. So if you're coming here for help, you need to understand this is not your place. This is not your house. This is not your second chance to control me." She wiped at her face with shaking fingers. "I'll do whatever you ask," she whispered. "I swear, Lisa, I can't watch them suffer anymore." And that's when I felt it, not triumph, not satisfaction, but peace. I wasn't reacting to her. I was setting the terms. "You want help?" I asked. "Then you sit down outside, not in, and you listen to everything you did. No defensiveness. No tears that turn into guilt trips. No, but I didn't mean it. You listen, you absorb it, you face it." She nodded, a slight sob catching in her throat. "But I'll say this now," I added. "You will not step over that threshold until I say so. And even then, it won't mean things go back to how they were. That door, it only opens when the past is no longer welcome inside it." She nodded again. But this time slower, heavier. "I understand," she whispered. For the first time in my life, she looked up at me like someone who finally knew what they'd done. And for the first time in mine, I wasn't afraid to be the one with the power. I didn't want to have the conversation in my apartment. That space was sacred, quiet, safe, full of laughter and soft music and the scent of orange peel and vanilla. So we sat outside on the patio, 2 mismatched lawn chairs pulled close enough for truth to pass between them, but not close enough for comfort. It was cold, not bitter, but sharp enough to make honesty feel raw. Margaret sat across from me, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes darting like she expected the air itself to judge her. "I'm ready," she said softly. I wasn't sure she was, but I was. I took a deep breath and began. "I was 8 the first time I realized you didn't see me the way you saw Emily." She flinched, but didn't speak. "She got the dresses, the praise, the extra cookies. I got the be quiets and why can't you behave like your sister? And when I got older, it wasn't just about behavior. It was everything." Still, she said nothing. Her eyes welled, but the tears didn't fall. That I appreciated. I wasn't looking for a performance. "When I married Kevin and things started to go bad, you didn't ask questions. You blamed me, told me maybe if I acted like a wife, he wouldn't be so cold. When I left him, you said I was giving up too fast." Margaret finally spoke, voice shaky. "I didn't know how bad it was." "You didn't want to know," I said. "It would have required you to take my side, and you never did." She looked down at her hands. "I was raised to believe." "I don't care how you were raised," I snapped, then steadied my breath. "I care about how you raised me." Silence settled again, heavy, real. "My kids," I continued, quieter now. "They deserved better. They deserved a grandmother who saw them, loved them, not one who punished them for my choices, not one who handed gifts to Emily's kids while mine watched in silence." Margaret's shoulders sank. Her voice was barely audible. "I thought if I helped Emily more, she'd stay close. I didn't know I was pushing you away. You didn't just push me away, I said. You taught me that love was conditional, that being overlooked was normal, that if I wanted to be respected, I had to earn it by being smaller, quieter, easier. Margaret was crying now. Quiet tears, no sobs, just water leaking from years of rot finally surfacing. I'm sorry, she said. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't realize how much damage I did until I lost everything. I nodded. That's the thing about damage, I replied. It keeps growing when it goes unspoken. We sat there for a while, nothing between us but cold air and a decade of buried truths. I'm willing to help, I said at last. You and Emily, but only under conditions. She looked up, surprised. No unscheduled visits, no money without receipts and paperwork, no backhanded comments, and no guilt trips ever again. Margaret nodded quickly, relief slipping into her features. I'm not doing this for you, I added. I'm doing this for the kids because they didn't choose any of this, and I won't let them suffer because their adults failed them. I understand, she whispered. I believed her. Not because she said it well, but because, for the first time, she didn't try to rewrite the story. Dan stepped onto the patio then, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me and gave Margaret a nod. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. And I loved him more in that moment than I could explain. We sat there, the 3 of us, as the sky turned pink at the edges. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a real one. And for now, that was enough. Helping them didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. I made it clear from the beginning this wasn't a reunion. It wasn't forgiveness handed out like favors at a baby shower. This was logistics. Me protecting the only thing I cared about now, peace. Margaret and Emily moved into a city-sponsored transitional apartment complex on the other side of town. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, shared laundry, thin walls. But it was clean, safe, and better than the shelter. I'd made the first phone calls myself, advocacy programs, public assistance coordinators, a job counselor I knew from a former client. I didn't tell them I was doing it. I didn't need their thanks. I needed them stable. I needed them out of survival mode so they wouldn't crawl back into my life through pity or guilt. The terms were clear. No unscheduled visits. No emotional manipulation. No money without receipts. No, do you remember when I raised you speeches? I even made them sign an agreement, not legal, just typed and printed, with spaces for their signatures. It wasn't about enforcement. It was about symbolism. About teaching people who'd never respected boundaries that mine were now made of steel. Emily bristled at first. Do you really think I'd just show up and start asking for handouts? She said. I looked her dead in the eye. Yes, that's exactly what I think. She had the good sense to sign without further comment. Margaret, on the other hand, didn't even flinch. She just read the paper slowly, quietly, and signed. I think she knew she was lucky I was offering anything at all. The job counselor found Margaret part-time work cataloging inventory at a thrift store. Emily got a night shift cleaning medical offices. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And it was theirs. Zoe and Caleb didn't ask questions. They knew something had shifted, but I didn't offer explanations unless they asked. I just told them we were safe, that we didn't owe anything to anyone. Dan, ever steady, was my anchor. He never questioned my decisions. He just made sure I was okay, dropping off soup when I skipped meals, handling bedtime stories on the nights I needed space to breathe. One day, after I helped Emily fill out a childcare voucher form, she lingered at the doorway before leaving. I know I don't deserve it, she said, eyes downcast. But thank you. I didn't say you're welcome. I didn't soften, I just said, don't waste it. She nodded and left. That was our new language now, brief, boundaried, and built entirely on earned trust. Margaret never said thank you, but she also never crossed the line. That in itself felt like progress. For once, they were living consequences, and for once I wasn't part of their downfall. I was the wall between them and the edge, and it felt good, not triumphant, not smug, just good, like fresh air in lungs that had forgotten how to expand. Some endings come loud, with slamming doors or shouted goodbyes. Mine came with birdsong, flower petals, and my daughter smoothing wrinkles from my wedding dress like it was made of gold. The park where Dan and I married wasn't fancy. We couldn't afford grand, but we didn't need grand. We needed real. And Real showed up with folding chairs, wildflowers, cupcakes made in our kitchen the night before, and a few of the people who never stopped believing I deserved to be loved. Zoe walked me down the aisle. Not because I didn't have anyone else, but because she was someone else. Stronger now, quieter still, but watchful in that fierce, protective way I once thought only adults possessed. Caleb held the rings in his small, nervous hands, whispering reminders to himself like, "Left pocket, left pocket, left pocket." He wore a too-big suit jacket and a grin that made me want to cry. Dan stood waiting under a wooden arch that his brother built from old fence posts. He wore no tie, just a clean shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes shining. When I reached him, he took both my hands and kissed my knuckles like they were sacred. It wasn't about a ceremony. It was about the fact that I was no longer afraid of being seen. Margaret and Emily came. I didn't invite them out of guilt. I invited them because I no longer feared their presence. They sat near the back, quiet, respectful. No speeches. No attempts at center stage. Margaret wore sunglasses the entire time. Emily had her children tucked tightly against her sides. I saw the tension in their faces, the way they watched, uncertain if they were allowed to smile. I didn't give them permission. I gave them distance. That was the gift, presence without access. The vows were simple. Dan looked into my eyes and said, "I will never make you smaller." And just like that, something inside me settled. Permanently. We had cupcakes instead of cake, lemonade in mason jars. No band, just a Bluetooth speaker and a playlist Zoe made, mostly songs about bravery and light. People danced barefoot in the grass. The air smelled like honeysuckle and hope. Later, when the sun began to dip and the guests wandered home, I sat under a blooming tree with my shoes off and my heart full. Dan joined me. Zoe leaned her head on my shoulder. Caleb was asleep on a picnic blanket, one hand still clutching a half-eaten cookie. I looked around and didn't feel regret. Not even for the hard years. Because without the betrayals, the breakings, the brutal lessons, I might never have known what peace feels like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It just is. And now so was I whole. Seen, loved, without apology.